Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 22 of our reading of Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 Unforgettable Explorations into the Realm of the Supernatural, adapted by Walter B. Gibson. So always we have to go over the copyright information, which is as follows. Here we go. It says, Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone is copyright 1963 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated, and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited is copyright 1964 by Cayuga Productions Incorporated, all rights reserved. This 1983 edition was published by Bonanza Books, distributed by Outlet Book Company Incorporated, a Random House company, and it gives the address right there. This book was previously published as two separate works entitled Rod Serling's The Twilight Zone and Rod Serling's Twilight Zone Revisited, printed and bound in the United States of America, and then all the Library of Congress information is all right there, if you're interested in that. Anyways, in the last episode, we started reading The House on the Square. And it's about these people who debunk ghost houses and stuff like that. Supernatural phenomena. So, anyways, we are going to continue, and I don't remember where we left off, but we'll start back, so we do. Okay. Okay, then right here. In addition to cameras, flashlights, compass, and other equipment, Bruce always carried a long, stout cane with a heavy bulb-shaped head. The stick, which his uncle had brought back from the Orient, was known as Penang Lawyer because in the settlement of Penang, the only way to win an argument was to use a heavy cudgel, presumably of that type. Jeff, who was a good pistol shot, also carried a .32 automatic for emergencies. Bruce's stick came in handy when they investigated a summer cottage, which squeamish renters had left because of odd sounds they had heard from a closed bunk room. On opening the door, Bruce and Jeff were swept back by a blackish shape that swooped out with all the force and fury of a tornado. But Bruce was ready for it, swinging the bulbous end of the Penang Lawyer into the thing, which scattered all apart. It says the monstrous form was Bruce's stick came in handy. Okay. The monstrous form was a swarm of bats that had been hibernating in the bunk room and what were responsible for the weird sounds. But for Bruce's timely work with the club end, which he used with mallet-like force, he and Jeff might have been badly clawed and bitten by the winged horde as they released. Instead, they soon cleared the cottage of the pests and the ghostly rumors as well. Excuse me. Jeff's turn came one season when they were ghost hunting in an old mill which a prospective buyer wanted to turn into a country tea room. Along with ghostly groans and moans, slow footsteps were sometimes heard descending the old stairway in one corner of the building. Yet no one had ever seen the spectral figure that belonged with them, and the fact that it was invisible made it all the more uncanny. It didn't take long to track down the more standard sounds. The groans were due to the creaky condition of the beams and timbers. The moans were echoing from a gushing mill race, which Bruce and Jeff were watching the stairs, which were outlined in the dim light, when the footsteps began descending them in a slow, even fashion. The steady, invisible approach was enough to scare off almost anyone, but Bruce was ready to surge blindly and start lashing with his cane at the imaginary prowler when Jeff suddenly ordered, "Hold it, I'll handle this." Then, pressing the switch of his flashlight, Jeff spotted its beam some 4 steps lower. The blasted point, blasted point blank with his gun at where the unseen figure's feet should have been. One more footstep came with a halting plop. Oh, I see. And Jeff's light was focused upon a very dead ghost in the form of a huge rat. That was the creature that had produced the inexplicable sounds. Night after night, the rat had come boldly down the stairs, thudding its full weight upon the succeeding step. The corner served as a sound box that magnified the emphatic thumps until they reached a proportion of a cautious human tread, which had been accepted as something ghostly. Jeff's keen sight, plus his still keener insight, had given him an inkling as to the actual cause. The ghost hunters promptly recommended that a crew of workmen strengthen the building by day and eliminate the creaks, and that some capable cats should patrol the premise by night to handle any brother rats who might have been taken over for the martyred rodent who had played a ghost. The result was that all unexplainable manifestations immediately ceased, and the team of Bruce Barlow and Jeff Shelby was paid off handsomely for their ghost-breaking job. A marked difference grew between Bruce and Jeff during the years they worked together. To a great degree, it accounted for their increased success. Bruce became constantly bolder and more contemptuous of ghosts, while Jeff chose a scholarly and analytical approach. As a result, they pleased both types of customers, believers and skeptics. Oddly enough, the career that Bruce and Jeff chose after graduation from college had much to do with this. Bruce became a physical director and athletic coach at a boys' school, while Jeff continued with postgraduate studies and took his doctor's degree in philosophy. Every summer they teamed as usual and profitably debunked their regular quota of haunted houses. Although they differed in their manner of approach, Bruce was more than ever eager to squash right into a case on a trial and error basis, while Jeff insisted on a preliminary survey of the scientific sort. To that, Bruce objected strenuously. "If I waited for you to analyze all these cases," Bruce told Jeff, "we would never get around to the real explanations of the so-called ghosts. That may account for the few cases where we didn't find an answer." "Perhaps," observed Jeff, in a speculative tone, "some of those cases were not as simple as you suppose." "You mean you're beginning to believe in ghosts?" demanded Bruce. "You're crazy. Anyway, let's not talk about our failures. What we want is more jobs like the one we just finished." Bruce referred to a haunted, quote-unquote, glen outside of New York City, close to the famous Sleepy Hollow where a headless horseman had once supposedly ridden. A luminous, beckoning figure had been seen below a rustic bridge, and the owner of the glen had installed big automatic searchlights to trap the ghosts. But always the apparition vanished at the first blaze of the lights, recording another triumph for superstition over science. When Bruce and Jeff had taken over, they promptly dismantled the searchlights. Instead, they took their stance at the spot where the ghost usually appeared, and at the first bluish flicker, they had photographed it close up with infrared equipment. The developed prints had shown it to be marsh gas that added a lifelike shimmer to a stump of phosphorescent spunkwood. Yeah, spunkwood. I've never heard of that. The searchlights had defeated their own aim by drowning the trifling glow with an overpowering glare. Bruce and Jeff had come into New York City and collected a full fee with bonus from the owner of the de-haunted Glen. It was early September, and Bruce had a week to go before his vacation ended, so he proposed that they make it profitable. A lady up at Sleepy Hollow told me that if we wanted a house that was really haunted, declared Bruce, we'd find one in Redgate Square, right here in Manhattan. She lived in the neighborhood, so she should know. All right, agreed Jeff. Let's go and have a look. They finally located Redgate Square, set back from a dead-end street near the East River, the fourth house from the left, which bore the number 306, was a misfit in the otherwise well-kept row. Its whole front looked neglected, its brickwork colorless, and the white window trimmings dull and grimy. The front gate was canted at an angle on a wobbly iron picket fence that was badly rusted. A low balcony jutted from the second floor front, giving it a squatty appearance. On the gate was a sign, "For sale or rent, A.J. Whitaker, Real Estate." They checked the address, and Bruce flagged a passing cab with a wave of his Penang lawyer. 10 minutes later, they were talking to Mr. A.J. Whitaker in his real estate office. He was a quiet elderly man who gave a dry-faced smile when they told him why they were interested in 306 Redgate Square. "Ghost hunters, eh?" queried Whitaker. "Well, I'm willing to meet your usual terms if you will stay a week in that house." Whitaker dug a big envelope from the bottom drawer and whacked it to get rid of a long accumulation of dust. As he stated, "A confidential file on number 306. Often I've wanted to get rid of it, but I knew someday all this data would be needed." From the envelope, Whitaker brought out deed, title, leases, floor plans, photographs, letters, and other documents as he continued. One of the early owners was named Howard Glendon, who lived there with his uncle and a very powerful serving man named Crandall. At times, the uncle became erratic. I might say violent, and had to be confined in a barred room at the back of the fourth floor. At other times, he was seen glaring from windows or heard howling about the house. Only Crandall could control him. Later, Glendon sold the house and took his uncle abroad, so he said, but no one actually saw the uncle leave the house. Whitaker produced an old photograph that showed the second-story balcony of 306 Redgate Square. There a man was glaring from a window above the wrought iron rail, apparently enraged at the photographer who had snapped that chance shot of him. The man's face showed a demoniac leer, and his lips were distorted in a fierce snarl. While Bruce studied those demented features, etching their details in his mind, Whitaker stated, "That is Glendon's uncle. That is Glendon's uncle in one of his milder moods. Otherwise, they would have had him confined in the top floor back room." Jeff was becoming restless, but Bruce was intensely interested. Bluntly, he asked, "Do you think the uncle died there?" "He might have," replied Whitaker, "because all of the disturbances have originated in that room, in the fourth floor, at the fourth floor back. A family named Rowland moved in after the Glendons left, but they were glad to move out a few months later. They had trouble keeping servants who were essential in those days." "And then who moved in?" inquired Bruce. "Several families," Whitaker gestured to the files. "They're all listed here, and they all have had servant problems. Some closed off the fourth floor, letting servants sleep on the third floor, but they kept hearing things being moved above them, which was as bad as living on the top floor. Finally, the Ashursts took over. They had 5 daughters and 3 servants who had been with the family for years, so they were willing to accept the odd situation. One maid, Della, had the back room on the top floor and complained about feeling ill but she decided to stay it out because the eldest Ashurst's daughter was about to be married. On the evening of the wedding rehearsal, Della came screaming down the stairs, stark mad. They rushed her to the hospital, where she shrieked at any mention of the room where it all happened. 2 days later, she died. Nobody had dared to sleep there since. Jeff and I won't mind, declared Bruce nonchalantly. Let's go over to the square right now. The sooner we begin this deal, the better. Soon they arrived at the house at Redgate Square, ready to invade it. Bag and baggage. But, for once, Jeff Shelby felt himself a silent and unwilling partner in a ghost hunt entirely engineered by Bruce Barlow. From the moment the rusty gate groaned on its hinges and the flagstones gave dull echoes underfoot, Jeff felt that he and Bruce were unwanted in this particularly gloomy preserves. The overhanging balcony seemed like the raised jaw of a monstrous creature ready to gobble its hapless prey, for its overhang cut off all view of the neighboring balconies. When the rusted lock of the heavy, dark front door refused to yield to Whitaker's key, Jeff was tempted to turn and dash out through the gate. Only his regard for Bruce restrained him from that cowardly act. The door finally opened, and they entered a long, low hallway with a gloomy, stiffly furnished reception room on the left. The hallway led into a dining room finished in oak, which added to the morbid motif. Jeff noted a prevailing musty odor and commented, "Damp in here, isn't it?" "Damp?" echoed Whitaker. "Why, this house is the driest in the block. Not a trace of mildew on the walls and these floors." He stamped loudly along the hall. "Why, they haven't a warped board anywhere. Look at the furniture. It's all in perfect condition. Still, it seems so moldy." "What does, Jeff?" broke in Bruce. "Your imagination?" That quieted Jeff, but when they reached the kitchen, he glanced suspiciously at an old-fashioned elevator device in the corner, which had been used as a dumbwaiter to send food and drinks upstairs. Bruce noted Jeff's look and flicked a flashlight up the shaft. "No skeletons here," laughed Bruce, but we can look in all the closets as we go along." They went up to the second floor and into the front parlor, which was weird indeed, for the overstuffed chairs and couches were draped with white sheets that gave them a ghostly look, despite the strong afternoon sunlight. Jeff stopped at the very window shown in the old photograph and stared out over the balcony rail, just as Glendon's uncle once had. Momentarily, Jeff wondered if something in the house could have caused the man's wild look, for Jeff felt a sudden mistrust of everything behind him, including his longtime friend Bruce Barlow and the polite, obliging Mr. Whitaker. Jeff shook off a sudden chill as he wheeled about, only to find that neither of his companions had even been looking in his direction. Bruce had opened a suitcase and was spreading the ghost hunting equipment on a table he had cleared for that purpose. There were cameras, films, and other photographic equipment, also metal measuring tapes, a ball of cord, and some lead fish weights. "We measure walls for thickness," Bruce explained to Mr. Whitaker, and used the cord and weights as a plumb line to see if air shafts, wells, and so on are truly vertical. "And here's an old friend." Bruce brought the carpenter's level from the bag. "This enables us to spot slanted floors." Bruce gave a side glance towards Jeff. "Remember the old house with the pool of blood, Jeff?" Jeff nodded. Now Bruce was spreading out a nest of small, shallow bowls with a flask of mercury and two pairs of soft-soled shoes. "We fill the bowls with mercury," Bruce told Whitaker, "and set them at key spots. If anything more solid than a ghost comes prowling by, the tremors of the mercury will indicate it. Then Jeff and I put on the soft-soled shoes and go sneaking up on it. The mercury is good at detecting vibrations, too. That's how we tracked the subway ghost in Greenwich Village. Remember that case, Jeff? Jeff remembered and gave a shiver, but it wasn't recollective. It had to do with the atmosphere here in the parlor of the house on the square. This place is cold, he complained. Terribly cold. Can't we start a fire in the fireplace? Certainly, agreed Whitaker. But I haven't noticed any chill. Neither have I, declared Bruce, taking a thermometer from the bag. And what's more, the temperature hasn't dropped a single degree since we came in here. I checked it downstairs, and it is still the same. Weird. Jeff decided to defer the fire and then continue their tour of the house. The second floor back was mostly bedrooms, and so was the entire third floor. To Bruce, the third floor seemed less chilly than the second, but the floor proved truly ominous. It was reached by a stairway that went up to a landing in a rear corner of the house, then turned and brought them to the approximate center of the top floor. At the front were two bedrooms, with a lengthwise wall between, giving each a large front window. But the arrangement at the back was quite different. Due to the back stairs, the space for bedrooms was limited, so they were arranged in tandem form. First, there was a squarish room with no window, only a transom above the door to admit light and air from the hallway. In the back corner of that outer room was a door leading to the inner room, which was so squarish it had a small window above a rear court. Each room was identically furnished with a cot, table, and chair, but the inner room, despite the window, was the more ominous, for this was where the ghostly manifestation had presumably driven the occupants to madness and death. Bruce studied the window, noting its heavy frame and some deep holes that went into the woodwork beneath a metal reinforcement. These were for the bars originally on the windows, he asked Whitaker. Right, returned Whitaker. The bars were removed after the Glendons sold the house and left. Bruce thrust his head and shoulders out the window, which was just large enough to accommodate him. He drew back in and gestured for Jeff to do the same. Jeff did, and saw that the wall went straight down to a court with no chance of reaching any windows on the floor below, as they were off at other angles again. Jeff felt the sickening sensation of a menace close behind him, but here it was worse than in the parlor, 2 floors below, because the threat of a fall was actual. Jeff shied back into the room quite suddenly. Again, the others were too busy to notice Jeff's reaction. Bruce was mapping out the campaign that he and Jeff were to follow, while Whitaker was listening with commending nods. We'll start right here in this room at midnight, declared Bruce, since that seems to be the 0 hour. I'll sleep here and let Jeff have the cot in the outer room. I'll get the facts firsthand, and Jeff can attest them. Jeff wondered how good a witness he would be if his present jittery mood continued, but he maintained a discreet silence. What about the rest of the house? Asked Whitaker. We'll keep tabs on it until midnight, replied Bruce. Give it what Jeff calls a preliminary survey. I don't think we will have to investigate it further. Once we've made short work of the ghost business up here. There is no electricity in the house, reminded Whitaker, and it may take a few days to have it turned on. And by then, we won't need it, interposed Bruce with a confident smile. Anyways, the ghost business started back in the gaslight area, so they didn't have electricity either. That's a good point. Whitaker left stating that he would have dinner sent in for the ghost hunters from a neighborhood restaurant. Bruce and Jeff made their immediate headquarters in the second floor parlor where they had their equipment, and their first act was to start the fire that Jeff wanted, but even that cheery blaze failed to lessen Jeff's occasional chills. Jeff was glad when Bruce suggested that they make a survey of the house first by the fading daylight, later with their powerful flashlights. When the dinner arrived, they ate it in the somber oak-furnished dining room, then went up to the parlor again, where by the firelight they made notes of all that they had accomplished so far, which in the final analysis was very little. When they listened for suspicious sounds, all they heard was the occasional spurt of a taxicab out in front of Redgate Square. Then, as midnight neared, Bruce picked up his Penang lawyer from beside the fireplace and said, "It's nearing the 0 hour, Jeff. Let's go." And we'll find out what happens here at a later time. We've been reading from Rod Serling's Twilight Zone, 26 Unforgettable Explorations into the Realm of the Supernatural, and it is adapted by Walter B. Gibson. We've been reading The House on the Square, I think. We double check. There's something about a house on a square, so let's see. The House on the Square, yes. Anyways, so if you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. Also, if you want to support me in any way, or if you want to join the Discord server, all information will be in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.